What discussions were you involved in related to abruptly canceling contracts or ending DEI efforts or eliminating outreach to LGBTQ? Do you believe that an inspector general should be entirely independent from the administration in which they serve?
Thank you for that question, Senator Murray. I do.
I'd ask Senator Blumenthal's question again. What substantive work were you doing if you weren't involved in any of that?
Well, again, my role as senior advisor was to look into actions that were going on in the administrations.
But a lot of the actions that were going on in the administration that we know about were about ending DEI, about firing employees, about canceling contracts. So
the role of inspectors general in the federal government is one of the most critical components of accountability in public service. Created by Congress through the Inspector General Act of 1978, these officials serve as independent watchdogs within federal agencies, charged with identifying waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. Their responsibility is to ensure that government programs operate transparently, efficiently, and with integrity. To maintain that independence, the law is clear. Inspectors general must be appointed without regard to political affiliation and solely based on integrity, competence, and impartiality. That legal requirement and the broader purpose of inspectors general are what brought us to this particular Senate confirmation hearing. The nominee, Ms. Mason, was under consideration for the position of Inspector General at the Department of Veterans Affairs, or VA, one of the largest and most complex agencies in the federal government, responsible for delivering health care, benefits, and services to millions of American veterans and their families.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield my time.
Senator Murray.
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Mason, you did say on your questionnaire that you continued to be a senior advisor to Secretary Collins after you were nominated to become the Inspector General monitoring his agency. While you were senior advisor to Secretary Collins, what discussions were you involved in related to abruptly canceling contracts or ending DEI efforts or eliminating outreach to LGBTQ?
Thank you for the question, Senator Murray. And to be clear, yes, at the time I answered the questionnaire, I was senior advisor to the Secretary. That role ended very quickly. After I submitted that questionnaire, I'm now senior advisor to VEO and do not sit in the Secretary's suite.
Well,
So as for your question as to those roles, the only roles I had with contracts were ensuring that the organizations that were in my portfolio knew that they needed to justify the contracts and ensured that they responded timely. I did not review contracts. I was not involved in those. As far as in the DEI situation, that was an executive order, and shortly after the senior advisors came in, they were followed by more senior advisors, and that was not something that was on my plate. That belonged to General Counsel and the senior advisor who was charged with EEOs.
I'd ask Senator Blumenthal's question again. What substantive work were you doing if you weren't involved in any of that?
Well, again, my role as senior advisor was to look into actions that were going on in the administrations.
But a lot of the actions that were going on in the administration that we know about were about ending DEI, about firing employees, about canceling contracts. So that was most of the activity that was going on there. So
that was not in my portfolio. There were separate senior advisors assigned to that. My portfolio was looking at the way those organizations operated and how they served veterans, particularly VBA, because it's such a large organization. There were challenges with the digital education, digital GI Bill, challenge with disability compensation backlogs and inventory with both the board and VBA, challenges with loan guarantees. There were a variety of challenges within VBA that I was
let me
looking at.
ask you differently. What was your engagement with DOJ and the White House outside of the Presidential Personnel Office?
I have no engagement with DOJ in the White House.
Zero.
None.
No contact? No, you know.
The only contact I had was a swearing in. I attended a swearing in for a person who has since, has left the department in DOJ. That person, I attended the VA swearing in. That was it.
As you know, Congress has a responsibility to conduct oversight over the Office of Inspector General to make sure that they are properly conducting their role. So it's really crucial, as you well know, that the OIG is transparent. If you are confirmed, will you provide us with a list of every ongoing OIG investigation within 30 days?
Yes, Senator, I will do so.
Okay. The budget for VA proposed the elimination of, quote, unnecessary outreach activities. From a congressional perspective, it is really critical to make sure that any canceled outreach doesn't impact veterans' ability to receive care that's necessary to provide. If confirmed, will you hold the department responsible for conducting all outreach that is in statute or policy, even if the political leadership, meaning your former boss, Secretary Collins, doesn't want to reach out to those groups?
Ms. Mason is not new to the VA. She has worked at the department under multiple administrations, Republican and Democratic, and has spent years focused on issues impacting veterans, including modernization efforts and program oversight. However, the controversy surrounding her nomination has less to do with her RSUM and more to do with her recent role as a senior advisor to VA Secretary Collins, who is himself a political appointee. The fact that Ms. Mason continued to advise Secretary Collins after being nominated for the Inspector General position triggered concerns from multiple senators. The core issue at stake is the question of independence. Can someone who recently served in an advisory role to a department's political leadership credibly and impartially investigate that very leadership and their actions? Senators, including Senator Patty Murray, expressed particular concern over recent developments at the VA, including the cancellation of diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) programs, the potential reduction of outreach to LGBTQ+ veterans, and the abrupt termination of certain contracts. These actions are controversial and highly sensitive, and it's precisely the type of conduct that inspectors general are tasked with investigating when necessary. While Ms. Mason denied direct involvement in decisions about ending DEI or LGBTQ outreach, the fact that such actions were occurring around her advisory role fueled skepticism from lawmakers. They pressed her on whether she would be transparent with Congress, whether she would provide a full list of ongoing investigations, and perhaps most importantly, whether she could truly function independently from the administration she previously advised. Ultimately, this hearing speaks to a larger issue in federal governance, the need to preserve the independence of oversight bodies, especially at a time of political polarization and public distrust in institutions. The role of an inspector general is not just to check boxes or review documents, but to serve as an unbiased protector of the public interest, ensuring that agencies like the V operate according to the law, fairly, and without favoritism. For the millions of veterans relying on the VAA's programs, that accountability is not just a formality, it's essential to protecting their rights, their benefits, and their futures.
So, Senator Murray, I will look into all those situations, and I will see where they are statutory required, and they will be held accountable under my watch as OIG if confirmed.
Okay, well, let me just ask this. Congress was very clear in 1978 when it passed the law governing inspectors general. The law states, and I want to quote it, "Each inspector general shall be appointed without regard to political affiliation and solely on the basis of integrity." Do you believe that an inspector general should be entirely independent from the administration in which they serve?
Thank you for that question, Senator Murray. I do.
Well, you were a political appointee for President Trump in his first term. And as we said on your questionnaire, you said you continued to be an advisor to Secretary Collins after you were nominated for this. Do you believe that this demonstrates the kind of nonpartisanship it takes to successfully execute this job?
Well, Senator Murray, I would refer to my years of experience in the department. I served 12 secretaries, 6, now 7 administrations. I am unique in that I was a careerist who became a political appointee. during the Trump administration, but I served into the Biden administration, and President Biden appointed me to a position to ensure that the department was implementing the executive orders from President Obama, President Trump, and President Biden on hiring veterans and military spouses. So yes, I do believe I have that as a lawyer and as a judge and as chairman, which was an independent, impartial position.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.